Home prices have been rising like never before, even increasing by as much as 30% in some markets just over the past year. We've seen this before with the crazy housing market just before the 2008 crash. At that time, home prices dropped by an average of around 20% across the country and much, much more in some places, in a correction that has had long-lasting impacts. So what's going to happen now? Are we set to see decreases in a correction like before, or will home prices keep rising? Well, in this video, I'm going to explain what's going on and what I think will happen to home prices in the very near future, so stick around. I recently came across an old newsreel from the 1930s.
This couple is going through a model house now. Suppose we follow them.
It's really interesting, kind of funny.
The husband apparently isn't very keen about it all, but you know how wives are. So in they go to this delightful living room.
It shows a couple touring a new home, checking out the kitchen and the bedrooms, and then ultimately looking at the price and realizing how affordable it is.
And so they leave, reluctantly it seems, for they both would like to have this place for their very own. Too bad they can't afford it. Ah, but maybe they can. For according to this sign, they can buy this house with monthly payments that are less than they now spend for rent.
Now, it may seem crazy to think that houses were ever that cheap, but of course things have changed a lot since then. Homes are built differently and there has been some inflation. So what would that price be equal to in today's dollars? Well, here are a few facts and figures. In 1935, the average household income was $1,731 a year in the US, and the average home price was around $3,900. That means that the average home cost about 2.25 times the average salary. The median household income in the US right now is about $72,000, and the median home price is about $428,000. Now that means that a home today costs almost 6 times more than the average salary. Here's a graph of home prices to salaries for the past 40 years that illustrates that change. It is more difficult to become a homeowner today than in the last almost 100 years. In fact, I've even had a lot of comments like this one on a recent video. This person was looking at buying a home for around $500,000 and interest rates at the time were about 3%. But in the meantime, prices went up by $100,000 and interest rates have more than doubled. A loan for the same house for someone in this position has just gone up by around $1,500 a month. That's just for the mortgage, not to mention property taxes and closing costs, which will all also be higher. I doubt that their income also went up by a similar amount. So if this is happening all over the country and frankly all over the world, how can that possibly be sustainable? And are prices going to come crashing down? Well, to understand that, we first have to take a look at the last major drop in home prices. The year was 2007. Spider-Man was the biggest movie and George Bush was the president. Everyone and their dog was investing in real estate and home prices were out of control. In fact, I remember a news story out of Florida at the time in which the same home was bought and sold by different investors 7 times within a short span of only a few months. Each time it was sold for more money than the last time, and each time the home was never actually occupied. Back then, there were also a lot of problems with loans. There were a lot of subprime loans, is what they called them, which were loans that were given out to people who were not creditworthy and couldn't afford the payments. Also, in the years just before the 2008 housing crisis, there were a lot of adjustable rate mortgages with payments that became unsustainable as rates increased. In fact, the percentage of mortgage loans at the time that had an adjustable rate was about 30 to 40%. That meant that as those interest rates increased, 30 to 40% of the population that had these adjustable rate mortgages saw their payments increase, and a lot of those people couldn't pay. And that led to defaults and the inability to price mortgage-backed securities, and that led to all sorts of problems. Back then, home prices were also on the rise, and in 4 years, they had gone up by about 55%. Then in less than 2 years, those prices crashed down by about 20%. Now that's on average. It was worse in some parts of the country than others. Now there's a lot of similarities to what happened back then and what is going on right now. For example, home prices are on the rise and incomes are not rising along with them. But there's also some significant differences today. Due to changes in laws and lending practices, the requirements to get a loan are much more stringent, and the likelihood of loans today being offered to individuals who are not creditworthy is far less. That means the quality of the loans that are being given out is much higher. Also, today we're in a historic housing shortage. Prior to 2008, there wasn't a housing shortage at all. In fact, there were too many homes being built. The ironic thing is that many builders, some of whom just went out of business entirely during the housing crisis, just stopped building homes, or at least didn't build as many as were needed. And that was because they felt it was risky to do so, or they didn't have the capital, didn't have the money to do it. And that's in part why there's a shortage today. Because of that, we can't necessarily blame all of today's home price increases on a bubble, because there is a need for housing and there just isn't enough housing to go around right now. At its core, it's really a supply and demand problem. Inflation is also another huge difference. Inflation prior to 2008 was under control, running around the Fed's target of a few percentage points. We also had even negative inflation for a short time during 2009. Then there's interest rates. Now, interest rates are oftentimes increased to combat inflation or decreased to try to stimulate the economy. And here is a graph of interest rates for the past 20 years. Prior to the housing crash in 2008, you can see that rates were around 5%. And then as the economy sputtered, they were lowered just as a recession hit. In today's case, though, rates were already low. And with our historically high inflation rate, we expect those interest rates to be much higher in the future. And so just like the example of my commenter towards the beginning, that will make it more expensive to buy a home, which will likely put pressure on home prices because that demand for housing is going to go down. The last thing that is really odd in today's market is the fact that homes are being purchased in large numbers by companies and not by individuals. These are companies that, for the most part, are buying homes to rent them out. In fact, in the fourth quarter of 2021, nearly 20% of all homes sold in the US were sold to one of these companies and not to individuals. That is unheard of, and it's one of the reasons why regular people have been having such a hard time over the past couple of years buying homes. These buyers generally come with cash offers and they can afford to go over the asking price, and regular folks just can't compete. Now, I think that these buyers are part of the reason why home prices have gone up so quickly recently. Now, it's unclear if these companies are in it for the long haul or if they're going to try to unload their homes quickly at the first sign of trouble or the first sign of home prices dropping. If they're in it for the long haul, then prices should be steady. But if they're going to start selling those homes off, that could drive those prices down even further. So there are a lot of similarities with the last housing crisis, but there are also a lot of differences, which makes it very difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen. And anyone who tells you that they know what's going to happen is lying. Now that said, let me tell you what I think is going to happen. It could get ugly. If we think of how much home prices have been pushed up over the past few years and how average incomes are not keeping up with those prices, something has to give. That said, it's not going to impact every market in the same way. Some parts of the country will see strong demand and prices will stay flat or even grow. Other parts of the country, however, may see significant declines in home values. In fact, here is a graph from CoreLogic showing some of the markets that have experienced some of the highest increases over the past couple of years. These areas are probably overvalued, and as there is more pressure on home prices, some homes in these areas will drop significantly in value. But those aren't the only areas. There are a few others where we could see significant declines, areas where we've seen a lot of price increases in the past couple of years. Now, whether or not the housing crash is a good thing really depends upon who you are. If you're a homeowner looking for appreciation or an investor looking for appreciation in your property, then you want prices to go up. If you're looking to buy a new home, you want prices to drop. I think as a whole, we do want prices to appreciate over time. We want them to keep up with inflation and maybe a little bit extra, but something has to give in this market where home affordability is lower than it's ever been. Now, for me, I'm an optimistic person, and I do think that there are going to be some markets, some overpriced markets that are going to lose some significant value. But there will still be others that are probably going to remain flat and maybe even grow a little bit over the next couple of years until things calm down. So what do all of you think? Do you agree with my assessment, or are there things that I'm missing? Be sure to send me a comment and let me know what your thoughts are on what housing is going to do, and maybe even let me know about the market that you're in. Have things gone crazy? Are you already seeing things change? Let me know. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new, and I'll see you in the next one.